Welcome, happy Friday. Welcome to Teaching Social Justice Practices to Master's Counseling Students through a Multicultural Lens. My name is Donnette Deigh. I am a student here at Liberty University. I'm here with the rest of my colleagues who are also students, and then they'll introduce themselves and tell you guys a little bit about themselves.
Good morning. I am Angelia Lomax. As Donnette mentioned, I am also a student at Liberty University in the counselor education program.
Good morning. My name is Andrea Garraway, and I too am a counselor education doctoral candidate. And I am honored to nod to our professor, Dr. Joy Mwendwa. She is our faculty sponsor. Unfortunately, she will not be joining us today, but she sends her regards.
Another one of our presenters is not here currently, but hopefully we'll see him a little later, and then we can introduce them later. All right, so let's get started. So we have 3 objectives here for you today. The first, The first objective is we want you all to understand why social justice, consciousness, and multicultural sensitivity are important in counseling program curriculums. We'll talk about that a little bit when I discuss, the rationales and the agenda later. The second objective, we want you all to identify various social justice practices that could be utilized in counseling programs to increase cultural competence through a multicultural lens. And we will introduce that a little bit later as well. And lastly, the most important part, right, why you guys are all here is for the resources. And we want you all to be able to apply these creative teachings of social justice, consciousness, and multiculturalism. So then you could apply this in your courses and then also in the field with your clients, community, whatever platforms you all use your counseling resources for, right? So today, this is our agenda for today. We will be talking about the rationale of really why we decided to talk about this topic or share this topic with you all. We will introduce the framework. If you're not familiar with the framework, we will talk about the framework a little bit. We want to know how you're able to use this framework with your social justice practices, and also how you're able to apply these things into the counseling curriculum. We will talk about the counselor educator's role, because in order to teach these things, you have to be a counselor educator, obviously, but it's also not limited to those who are counselor educators. So if you are a supervisor, if you are just also just a counselor that you want to use it, even as a student, you can teach these things to other students, to your peers. So we don't want you to just think that, okay, it's just counselor educators that can use these resources. We want everyone to be able to use these resources. After that, we will talk about some recommendations of some social justice practices that we think that is important. And some of these things you might already know, but it's good to just reiterate and share anyway. And then lastly, we'll talk about how we are going to use these things that we learned today and how we're going to apply them to the, counseling courses that we have in, K-Curve accredited programs. And then we'll do something fun regarding that. All right. Feel free to put anything that you want to share in the chat. Our team will be monitoring the chat. If you have a question or a comment, we will discuss that, but also we will do questions at the end. So feel free to do that. All right. So why did we decide that we wanted to use this topic and share this topic? So promoting social justice, what do you all think that means? We know that it's the 3rd core professional value listed in the ACA Code of Ethics, right? That's really important as far as you being a counselor. Social justice will mean that we are for the purpose of ending oppression, injustice that affects our clients, students, counselors, and then also any other social and institutional systems, right? We wanted that to be very clear when we wanted to share these applications, and then also share what we've used in our own counseling programs and what we thought was helpful. All right, so next, social justice consciousness is enhanced when they are able to, when counselors, is they, are able to understand the intricacies and implication of social justice issues. So the knowledge and the awareness of multiculturalism is applied, right? So you should have these this appreciation for your client's worldview, their life experiences, and this also results in the enhancement of your clinical skills as a counselor. And we want you to understand, like, these are the issues that we need to know in order to enhance our clients' quality of life, right? So counselors should be able to be prepared to be social justice advocates. However, we notice that, you know, some programs lack resources, and then that's fine. Universities face budget cuts, and that happens. And sometimes you can't add another course or get some more resources. Hiring new faculty is not always an option. And so that's why we provided these things for you, so then you can use this in a more practical way. We're offering practical strategies and recommendations so that we can assist with the foundations for a strong social justice advocacy work for work, right? So that's why we decided that we wanted to implement that into our program today, or our presentation today. Counselors need to understand the differences between multicultural counseling and social justice counseling in order to understand how to integrate them. So as you guys know, that multicultural counseling, we learn that in our classes, we learn that in our communities, but we really need to understand, like, what is the actual difference between the two so we can actually merge them together. Multicultural counseling is really focusing on the individuals and the interpersonal dynamics that they have, right? So sometimes multicultural counseling sometimes is too population specific, and it focuses on, like, maybe sometimes racial and ethnical concerns instead of, like, addressing the other identities that we actually see. So like sexual orientation and gender. We want to be able to merge everything, and sometimes multiculturalism focuses on those specific concerns. Social justice counseling, which is what we really want to talk about here today, is addressing the power dynamics, the issues of, you know, equity and oppression in all forms, and we need to address these needs of all oppressed groups. So when you know the differences between multicultural counseling and social justice counseling, you merge them together and you become a holistic counselor. Right? So that's what we want you to be here today, to be a holistic counselor and be able to use these strategies for days to come, forever, basically. And as we learn more things, we hope that you would integrate them, right? Allowing us as counselors to remove any preconceived notions and, you know, promoting, like I said earlier, is like promoting the understanding of the client's worldview and the lived experiences, again, enhance our own skills, and then also it enhances the client's quality of life, right? All right, so as far as the multiculturalism and social justice, including the ability to assess the unique dynamics and dimensions, like I talked about earlier, is that we want to be able to shape the human identity, right? So we know that counselors, the human identity is complex. The dimensions of identity is shaped and constructed by the, again, like I said earlier, the dynamics of power, oppression, and privilege. We just know that, and we want to be able to use those things. So counselors that are unaware of how these dimensions of identity and oppression can actually label clients with a diagnosis that they don't really need or deserve, right? You don't want to misdiagnose clients, right? But to actually know that their behaviors are actually normal and healthy responses to any toxic or maladaptive environments, right? So knowing all of these things about your client and merging what you know about multiculturalism and social justice will actually help you with diagnosing your client as well. And then also understanding more about the human identity. Right. So next, I'm going to pass it over to Angelia.
So for our presentation today, we are operating from the MSJCC Framework, which is the Multicultural and Social Justice Counseling Competencies. And basically what the framework says is that counselors and clients are both either privileged, can be privileged or marginalized. And so when they intersect, the framework offers different quadrants and different domains and different things that the counselor should consider in order to be a competent, culturally competent counselor and a social justice counselor. And so the 4 domains are counselor self-awareness, client worldview, counseling relationship, and then counseling and advocacy interventions. And so on the next slide, there is a diagram that shows where the 2 identities or the status of the counselor and the client intersect. And so when thinking about counselor self-awareness, that is, of course, the counselor understanding whether they themselves are either the privileged counselor or marginalized counselor, right? Having that self-awareness, acknowledging our assumptions and biases, as well as how they were shaped, right? And then also understanding or being aware of whether the client is marginalized or a privileged client, and then understanding how that was shaped. And then thinking about how the status of the client and the status of the counselor, how those 2 identities impact the counseling relationship. So that's where that third dynamic comes in, the counseling relationship, and thinking about how the client's worldview, how they view the world, what they believe, what they assume, what are the counselor's strengths and limitations in working with said client, and then acquiring culturally responsive skills, right? All of that is a part of the counseling relationship. And then, of course, acknowledging those differences in order to be forthright with the client and talk through those things. And then the last domain is the counseling advocacy interventions. And within that, there you address it. We want to, as a social justice counselor, right, we want to address those things from different perspectives. So you have the interpersonal, where you're looking at the person of the client, the interpersonal, where you're considering their relationships, institutional, so societal entities like schools and what type of impact those different structures have on the client, the societal norms in the community, public policy, how can we as counselors, right, advocate for our clients via public policy. So that's signing petitions, sending letters to a local government, things like that. And then even on the international level, we want to think about how global affairs may impact our either privileged or marginalized clients. So when addressing or thinking about how to educate master's level students, right, we want to be able to communicate the different layers that are involved and kind of the things that you want to think about, or that they would want to think about, right, with their future clients in order to be a multiculturally and social justice counselor and to be competent in those things. And so the framework offers very specific competencies under each domain that the counselor can reflect on and identify areas for growth and things like that that they need to achieve in order to, again, achieve competency. And so Andrea is going to speak on the counselor educator's role.
Thank you, Angelia. The counselor education role varies, as we're aware. One of the first things we talk about in this specific aspect is professional development and education. What is that? That is a systematic process of strengthening professionals that help them retain, obtain, and gain knowledge, skills, attitude, to be a counselor educator as part of that role is actually a lifestyle. We do that by being a part of professional organizations, presenting at conferences such as this, being able to mentor and bring other people along. That's part of our identity, but like I said, it's part of our lifestyle. Collaborative leadership consists of something that is quite intentional. It is purposeful, that is designed activities to develop and improve our organizational process, and also the integration of people's well-being, their beliefs, their mores from all different walks of life. Now, it's unfair to say that everybody's going to be familiar with every culture. So collaborative, in its true nature, ask everybody to work together to identify multicultural goals and for us to continuously improve in this area. So that is some of the things for you to be able to think about. And then when we talk about theory, application, and practice, that's where we kind of take things from a broader view into more of a micro view and put it all together. It is where we apply theory to practice. We discuss specific pedagogical examples of how do we integrate this thing that we're talking about? What do social issues look like? And how are we responsible in order to deliver that to our students, to our supervisees, for instance? Some examples of that can include case studies, online exercises, journaling, paper writing, just in the form of assignments. CACREP outlines several targets for us to meet with that specifically. But it can also be like class, for instance, class icebreakers where we're reflecting, we're having discussions, we are going out in the world and we're having experiments. One of the experiments I remember doing in my undergrad is to identify a population of people that you hadn't had much knowledge about. And then this was way back in the day when the world was different. And we were to go to that mall that Saturday and see if we found anybody. Of course, there's a rule that we are not discriminating or over inserting ourselves. It was well scripted, but for us to go out and have a conversation with that person, just casual at the mall. And I remember learning so much about this Asian woman that she worked at the mall and she was ready to talk and share. But I probably would not have done that or been bold to do that if it wasn't for an exercise that was given to me by my instructor at the time. All three of these aspects that mentioned can be target specific to the audience. So we can distinguish activities between whether it's you're talking to a colleague or your students, for instance, perhaps your supervisees. Your supervisees. So it is very target specific. It should also be learner centered. You are that role guardian, but understanding that individual is the subject matter expert. So asking what is it they want to learn. And then finally, it should also be a call to action. How are we using this information that we're learning to be able to now empower others and share about others? So may I ask for the next slide? Thank you. Effective learning strategies. Now, I wouldn't belabor the point too much because myself and my colleague Donnette, we're going to demo some of this for you a bit later on in the program. However, the examination of social justice issues in the literature and course reading is one of the ways that we can absolutely do that. And then encourage our students, whomever that specific audience member is, to ask questions. What is it about this was outstanding to you? What is it about that reading that you found a new gem that you just didn't know? What is it about it that troubled you? Perhaps it's something that it's a culture that you're well familiar with and the information in the book is wrong, which is quite possible. I'll give you for example, so South America, Guyana is often considered a part of the Caribbean, which is not true. South America, Guyana is actually on the continent of South America. So it is not associated with, but if you hear layman's conversation, when they are referring to the Caribbean, that country is lumped in. Here's another example about that country. For instance, people argue, several people argue, but lots of people on that continent consider themselves an American. Now, an American from the Western part of the world would go, but you're not from the United States of America, so how can you be American? Well, per geographical location, they are also considered part of the Americas. So being able to have these conversations can just ignite a class and have your students, your audience well engaged in history, but also immersing them in that multicultural piece. When you're sitting with a client and they're identifying where they are, what resonates with you. So those are just some examples. And then to be able to have that self-exploration, that being able to reflect what's happening. Perhaps there's cross transference or counter transference, etc. And then not feeling afraid to be wrong. So that very experiential piece of it, that it really helps us all to cultivate that learning environment that we should all strive for. So I'll pause here for now, and you'll hear back from me and Donnette again with examples of what learning strategies can look like.
So here we have Kwame. I think I see him. Your sound, Kwame.
So the question becomes, what do we do? How do I respond to social justice? What are some ways that I can practice social justice? And so here I'm going to share with us, with you all, some recommendations that you can consider as you think about practicing social justice. Number one is that you get involved in advocacy. There are all kinds of needs in society today that requires that we get involved in advocacy. We believe that change doesn't only happen in having a session with your clients, but really change also happens in society. In fact, a bigger change even take place in society. When you look at the needs in society, you can get involved in that, so that you incorporate what goes on in society to what goes on in your session of your clients. You can also be a part of community engagement. If you know, or if you look into your community, you will find out several organizations that do advocacy, and you can team up with them, join them, and in that way you can know what is happening and ways that you can you can participate your own style, your own strategies, your own information, things you can do to enhance what organizations are already doing. You can also, so pretty much practice. This is how I will go with that. I want to say this to the class, to you all, that I'm changing my job, and they were training me, and it ate into this time here. So when Andrea called me, the founder was still talking. So, but I'll go along this line, then I'll go back and change the, oh, somebody already removed it. So I'm sorry that I'm doing this, but this is how I will come across. How long do I have here? How many minutes?
As long as you want, Kwame.
All right. So, but I know that I will do about 5-7 minutes here. Yeah. So next slide.
Angelia?
Yes, ma'am. Sorry about that. So at this moment, we want to talk about how we can apply these creative or these innovative strategies to the counseling curriculum. And so we've pulled out a few classes to talk about specifically the orientation to counseling and theories course, the group counseling course, and then Donnette is going to speak on the practicum and internship courses. So as far as the orientation to counseling and the theories course, you can go to the next slide. One thing that the one way that it can be integrated into the master's classes is to remind them that they can start now. We don't have to wait until we are licensed. We don't have to wait until post-grad to be social justice counselors and to advocate for our clients and our future clients. We can go ahead and start now. Again, you can start by signing those petitions, showing up to community meetings, starting the research, right? You don't have to wait. And then as far as theorists, we as counselor educators, right, can be intentional about making sure we represent diverse theorists. So teaching our students about, Naeem Akbar and Mamie Phipps Clark and John Garcia and Melba Vasquez, like pulling those people in, although, and Andrea mentioned this earlier, although it may not be in our textbooks, that does not mean that we cannot teach it, or it doesn't mean that we leave it out. Sometimes we do have to go that extra mile, because what do we know? That when people see themselves, right, in the textbook, in the literature, in the curriculum, it creates a better connection. And for those individuals of the majority culture, it gives them more information and improves their cultural competency. So if they have clients who fit in these other identities and identifies other cultures, then they can better help them by pulling that into their psychoeducation piece with their clients too. So we want to be diverse when we talk about our theorists, and maybe not only stick to the folks who are, repeatedly mentioned in the textbooks, and even using textbooks by people of other cultures, and doing the same with multicultural theories. So again, maybe adding to what we have in our textbooks, providing supplemental instruction that include theories like John Henryism that talk about resilience, and culturally specific, culturally centered counseling theories, going the extra mile to find those, like John Henryism is specifically talking about resilience in the African American community, right? So we may, as counselor educators, when we're wanting to provide quality education and multiculturally competent and social justice centered instruction to our students to make sure they are culturally competent, sometimes we too have to go the extra mile to supplement the instruction. And so also included there may be the culturally adapted treatments and interventions, right? So teaching them what that looks like, giving them examples, letting them know that exists, right? Explaining the process of taking interventions and treatments that we already have, and then making and adapting them to fit very specific cultures. So we can do that in our orientation to counseling and our theories class. And then as far as group counseling, we can encourage them to journal as we encourage our clients, right? So it can be a parallel process. So you can use those reflective questions as you see there to talk about the culture that you see in your client and how it may be different, and where you will allow them and remind yourself to let them be the expert, right? Practicing cultural humility, right? Those are things that we can practice in group counseling, and how to process that in, again, a group setting. And then we'll talk more about the reflective questions in our example, and then allowing members of the group to use like artistic expression to communicate what they are feeling as it relates to culture in the group, and then of course processing that. Donnette?
All right, so as Angelia says, I'll be talking about the practicum and internship. So this is always the fun class, right? So using all the things that you learned from theories, groups, multicultural and counseling, research, everything, you're applying all of these things into practicum and internship, right? So what we know as far as multicultural counseling and social justice counseling, right? We're merging them together. Now, in practicum and internship, you use these things to do some role playing, right? So role playing, and us as counselor educators and supervisors, and maybe even counselors being peers to, your other counseling, staff or faculty, whatever it is, right? You're providing feedback so then you can facilitate that discussion, right? So we want people to know that it's okay not to know. And facilitating these conversations and this discussion will go against the shame or of not knowing or making mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes, and knowing that it's okay will actually make you more comfortable to having these discussions, right? So we want to tell our students, our clients even, that it's okay not to know, because I'm here to help you. I'm here to have this conversation with you. We can practice. What type of environments are you seeing these things? We can role play these things. What have you seen? This is the environment to do so. Even in the practicum, in the supervision also you can do it at your site. Either one of those things is applicable because it helps you grow as a counselor, right? So letting the student or the person who is learning how to use these strategies, right? Let them be able to design and implement these workshops using social justice and multicultural counseling, using those skills. Let them be able to implement psychoeducational programs so that then they can spread awareness to the community, like Kwame was saying. Using all of these things will help them share knowledge, then also integrate knowledge into themselves, right? You always learn something when you are learning and teaching. It's a multifaceted process. Having those social justice interest groups also help. Putting that out there is like, yeah, I'm interested in this, I'm interested in that, and then bringing people from the community with that same power, with that same knowledge, with that same aspiration to learn, really does help, grow that discussion against, not knowing, making mistakes. So again, each thing that you do is actually very, very progressive in your own learning and your own journey. Doing those outreach projects outside of school. I know sometimes that, we have those assignments again in the curriculum, like what, Andrea was saying earlier, is like sometimes those assignments that, professors and faculty give you in order to have that awareness, that helps. But you and yourself, you should be able to do those outreach projects on your own. And even though practicum and internship is a course, but that's also, it's also a lifestyle for you. It's like a vision of you as a counselor when you get out of school, or a vision of you as you are into the field. So using those skills and that mindset will actually help you later. It's really important that probably get into the habit of constructing those genograms and seeing what things you see at your site that you don't want to repeat out when you do decide to have your own practice or be a part of an agency. Identifying those power hierarchies that do affect your client's well-being, right, at your site, or even at the practical site at school. I know it varies, but that's actually another helpful way to be able to do that in your practicum and internship site. Like we use genograms for other things, like for family therapy and group therapy, maybe just multiculturalism for a job, but you can also use that in order to identify, you know, that power and oppression that you might see that your client is facing. It's like, okay, what are the levels that are you seeing here? Like, what are some things that you can change? What are some things that I can help you change? That genogram is there to help you as a counselor, but also the client to make those changes. And us as counselor educators, we're teaching you how to implement those things into these different programs. Right, so the next thing we're going to do is get into this activity. So Andrea put some things in the chat for you. I'm going to read this case study so then you all understand where we're going with our activity, right? So Megan is a hearing impaired 48-year-old biracial woman in her first year of graduate school. Megan is coming to you because, you know, due to COVID, she's been isolated from her friends. There have been some misunderstandings between them, which has actually exacerbated her anxiety and her negative thoughts. Megan shares that even though she is biracial, she identifies more as Caucasian, right? So we put these questions here to obviously facilitate the activity, but also to prompt some things that you would actually think about when you are being Megan's counselor, right? So what role does culture play in the counseling relationship? How might the client's culture influence her presenting problem? What culture and subcultures, you know, does the client present? These are some things that you want to think about when you are, you know, being an advocate for your client. So I'm going to go to another page for you, so bear with me just a little bit. All right.
So this will be an example of a case study using the let's do the activity. You click on that. There we go.
All right, so just to help you out, bigger screen.
Yeah, so what you're going to see is the exact information that I kind of prompted you in the chat box, but here are the instructions. Pull out your cell phone. You can open a different web browser, whichever is easiest, and just kind of cue this up for us where you are ready to respond. The very first activity here in 1 or 2 words, and then specifically asking you to reflect back on the vignette, that case study that was just read for you, and then we'll go from there. Just want to give you guys a couple of minutes to get queued up, and then we'll kick it back over to Donnette. We'll tag team it. Okay. As soon as you do, please begin answering the first question that's up on the top of this very screen. What role or roles does culture play in the counseling relationship? Using 1 or 2 words. As soon as you get on, just pop those answers over, and we should see results pop in. So it's saying that, yes, you can answer it in the chat. It's saying for Dr. Wright that he has to register. That's normal, but yes, please respond there. Thank you for that.
I think it's saying that, I think everyone is saying that they have to register.
Oh no.
Okay, so we'll just, you know, change it up.
Chat.
We'll change it up. So client experiences, I'm gonna put it on here and we're gonna make it work.
There we go.
Hey, it's important to be flexible. This kind of thing happens, you know?
Yeah,
And we're
for sure.
counselors. We're all about flexibility.
There we go.
For sure. Just keep those responses coming. Trust versus
Trust and mistrust. Yeah, I'll read them for you, Donnette, so you
Oh.
can.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
What about rapport building? When I read trust and mistrust, I thought, huh.
Yeah, and to elaborate, I kind of think about the how we talked about how marginalized status or privileged status, depending on our cultural identities, impacts the counseling relationship. And a lot of times, from the client perspective, that can come through as trust or mistrust.
Thanks for that. Yeah, that truly impacts the work. I wouldn't want to go to deep, dark places if that's not there.
We also have insight into the client's history.
That makes me think of understanding the client's why. So for instance, if there is a case of isolation, as we heard in the vignette, and though the client is saying that, I would normally stay by myself, it usually doesn't bother me, that might be a direct result from a cultural perspective. Good point.
And culture bound values. Also, Lacey brings up a good point about whether the client has an expectation of getting advice from the counselor, and then how that is or is congruent or incongruent with the counselor's approach.
Okay.
All right. Any
Really
more?
good feedback.
That's all we have for now. Understanding, sensitivity, comfort.
Yes, yes. I've been in counseling situations where I heard a client express not having to explain the why behind the why, knowing that that person gets them because they may share or reflect some of their cultural values. So that comfortability is definitely important. Yes, Lacey. We have one more: individual versus collective cultural values. This is really, really rich stuff. We're going to pause here on this one, and we're going to go through and see if we can get you guys to keep this level of engagement going to answer the next question. So this says, how might the client's culture influence her presenting problem? Just to refresh your memory a little bit, her presenting problem seems to be isolation, and specifically isolations away from her friends. She is a 48-year-old woman, and because of COVID, she's been especially isolated. And then there was a misunderstanding between them that worsened her anxiety and her negative thoughts. Okay. Cultural identity development. popped up from Dr. Wright. Okay.
Absolutely. That's good. Everyone is different and culture can be interpreted wrongly by the counselor. That's definitely where we want to make sure that as counselors, we are practicing cultural humility. As much as we may study about cultures and research them, the client is definitely the expert on how that manifests for them.
I'm not sure where I heard it, but it made my heart sing. You don't have to know everything about every culture, and it is okay to say, I don't know that. Can you tell me? Why do you guys do that? I am completely comfortable with being culturally ignorant in moments where I can be educated. So, and then being able to distinguish what's culturally normed for this client may be different for another, which is, I think that's what Eve is saying. So then when I interface with the next client with a similar story, I'm okay saying, I don't know that. Tell me again. Help me understand why do we do that? So good stuff. Yes.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Wright. Appropriate and individualized treatment planning.
One thing I've done in my practice is to be able to identify the client's culture versus their parents' culture. What I've learned with first generation migrants, for instance, they may take on primarily the culture of the host country or what they identify as their home country versus their parents' country. So being able to learn both sets and how that intersection may cause conflict between family dynamics.
Yes, and Andrea, that is a key, actually, when you look at first generation and second generation. For me, as an African who migrated to the United States, you can look at how parents from Africa and their approach to their children who were born here, second generation. So that is a key to understanding maybe a conflict that goes on there.
Okay. So if it's okay with you guys, I kind of want to pause here. We wouldn't get through all of the questions, but let's have a bit of Q&A, a bit of conversation. Tell me, guys, about what your experiences in this area, gems that you've picked up along the way that you can share with our small community here. And of course, if you have any questions or comments, we're welcoming of all of it in our last few minutes.
Yeah, I mentioned it in the chat, but I really appreciated this presentation because based on the title, I was, kind of hoping to get good examples of what, application-based learning could look like when it comes to social justice counseling. I think for me, thinking back on my own development as a counselor in training and as a counselor educator in training, when the RATS model came out that you guys talked about, I didn't learn things that way prior to that model coming out. And I kind of had to shift my learning perspective and focus a lot on those, power dynamics within the counseling relationship. And I think Donnette was the one who earlier in the presentation differentiated between multiculturalism and social justice. And I see that, and I think something that's really important is that I see with students, you know, a lot of times, especially focusing on textbooks, and I love also how you said, we don't have to teach what's in the textbook all the time. Multiculturalism looks a lot more and is focused a lot more on racial and ethnic diversity instead of all of the other identities that we have. And I think seeing the interconnectedness between social justice and advocacy and multiculturalism, like it's a lot I've found for students to wrap their minds around if they're initially being exposed to it. So I love how y'all have broken this up and talked about how it was helpful for you all to learn it as well. So I really appreciate that. And I think that's something that I want to take away and use with students moving forward.
Thank you so much for that feedback. You mentioned and hit the nail on the head. There's so much about culture and subcultures, and even subcultures have cultures within them. We focus on that racial piece and perhaps the gender piece, but also something else for us to take away is about somebody that's differently abled. So being visually impaired or hearing impaired, might not always be something that we look at, but it's a different culture. We've recently kind of dragged along the military and the police culture, how that's different, to be able to work efficiently with our clients. But being able to identify all of those subsets, I think really takes us to another level as educator and counselors. Thank you for that, Doctor. Yeah. Anyone else, maybe any other questions or comments, reflections? We welcome any feedback.
I just want to acknowledge what Eve said as far as counseling an Israeli client through an interpreter. I guess that experience of her trying to buy one egg instead of a dozen, and then, because the grocery store clerk or manager didn't really know, that kind of embarrassed her. And that's also something that a client actually feels outside in their environment, and so they're bringing that into the counseling room. It's like, how do you handle those feelings for your client? And and they don't know how to express those, especially if they are an immigrant. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. It's like, what do you guys think about that? If you do have someone that there's a barrier there and you're trying to figure out how I can connect with them. You understand the difference between multiculturalism and social justice, but it's like, okay, so how can I understand how to relate the information and the message you want to come across? Because that's also a barrier.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. Well, if we don't have anything else, we have 2 minutes left, and I think it'll be appropriate for us to give you guys an opportunity to find your next room and get settled there. I just want to thank you for your time, your attention. I think Angelia mentioned it in the comment, the engagement. I so appreciate always being in rich learning spaces. So from me and my colleagues, I'll let them say their goodbye, but we really appreciate putting this together and then having the opportunity to present it to you all. So thank you again from me. Bye-bye.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all for engaging, even if you and engaging in the chat as well. That was awesome. My thank you is just a point of gratitude and a reminder that this is just one example of integrating multicultural and social justice. This approach and using these reflective questions can be used in any one of the classes that you are teaching. It's more just like a reminder to ask those questions so that you can engage your students in critically thinking about their culture and their clients. So thank y'all again.
I also thank you. So I don't want to keep saying thank you. And it's just like, oh, all the praise. But you guys deserve the praise because you guys are awesome with all of your ideas. And we appreciate you coming to our presentation. I'm glad you all learned something that you can take back, because obviously that's the point, putting it out into the universe so then you all can receive it and share the wealth.
I want to say thank you again for the time you spent with us and all these contributions that you made in this presentation. I believe that they are helpful for all of us to help us in our development as counselor educators. So